Today I want to talk about the difference between grind and progression in games, and maybe a little bit in life too. It's kind of interesting because they're so similar, and yet they're also really different. So for example, let's say that I was playing an Anno 1800 game. Well, you're going to produce various things in factories, and then you're going to create other products with those goods. And so you do have a complex supply chain in Anno 1800. That's really what the game's all about. It's about building a supply chain and the logistics of all of it, and it's pretty cool. Now, let's pivot to a game like Farmville or any mobile game out there, and you'll find very similar systems on the surface. You're going to plant your crops, you're going to harvest your crops after a period of time, you're going to turn those crops into other goods, and you're going to sell them. So on the surface, I could say a game like Farmville is very similar to a game like Anno 1800. And yet, they couldn't be farther apart in reality. And what's interesting is they start off seeming similar. You're going to create things and you're going to sell them. And it does take time in both games to manufacture items. So there's not really any surprise there. But the difference is that the time it takes to manufacture something in an Anno game is part of the simulation mechanic, because it doesn't make sense for an infinite amount of resources to be created in an instant. So it does take time for the lumberjack to go collect the trees and turn them into planks or whatever it might be. But in Farmville, you also have timers, but those timers are designed to be something that keeps on getting longer and longer in terms of duration, until eventually you'll have timers that take days to finish. And at that point, it's nothing to do with simulation at all. It's 100% about trying to take up the player's time. It's a time sink mechanic, not a simulation mechanic. And eventually, that burns out players because they start to feel like this is not fun at all, because all it's doing is creating a carrot that's always just out of reach, and you're continually hoping that you can get to that next level, and then the next level after that is designed to be just a little bit more unattainable time-wise than the previous one. And that's just frustrating. And yet, at the beginning, they seem kind of similar to a point, but they're not. And it really comes down to motive. Why is a mechanic there? What is the purpose of it? Is it there to create a more realistic experience, or is it there to waste your time? And that's where going to MMO is looking at Albion Online, for example. I've always enjoyed the grinding in Albion Online. I just find it to be relaxing and fun to jump into the game, probably go to yellow and blue zones where it's safe and I don't have to think about what I'm doing, and just gather resources. And a lot of people would say that's absolutely a waste of your time, you know, and maybe they're right from their perspective, but I like it and I enjoy the sense of economy in the game. And the reason for that versus other games is that Albion Online is a simulation. At the core of its foundation, it's a sim game first, and an MMO second. So for example, yes, there is grind in the sense that if you want to get a bunch of resources, you're going to have to go get them in some way. But there's realism in the sense that it all is understandable and relatable. And if you wanted to avoid the grind entirely, you could do other things like buy low and sell high and manipulate the waves of market prices or something like that. But it's all a realistic sense of not that really there's any goal. You're just doing it because you want to do it, right? So does it really make a difference whether I go out and I gather one flax bush, or if I spend all day and I gather tons and tons of stacks of flax? It really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, there's no real objective other than objectives that you set for yourself. So since it's a sandbox, there isn't really any official grind, because there's nothing put there that says you have to do a whole bunch of this in order to get to a level which the game essentially requires you to try to chase. And a lot of people will say there is grind because if you want to be as powerful as you could possibly be, then you're going to have to do all of this stuff. But in a way, that's, again, just an individual creating their own goal and saying, this is where I want to end up. And it takes a lot of grind to get there. That's fine. But you're the one who chose to want to get there. In a game like Farmville, there's a lot more mechanics that are put in place to try to make you feel like you can't enjoy the game unless you get there. You know, I'm not really a PvPer in Albion Online, but I do know that there's a lot of people who go and have a fun time PvPing, and they do it in flat 4 gear. So it's not like you have to be rich in the game to enjoy all of the different types of content that the game has to offer. Or maybe you're more like me and you just want to chill in the game. It's just a way to scratch that MMO itch without really actually committing much effort or time. And so you just kind of play the economy a little bit and grow your crops and mess around on your personal island or something for a few minutes out of the day and then call it good. But there's not any official target, so the grind is just a mechanic of simulation, not a official grind that's arbitrary. Like for example, let's say we'll go back to New World, because New World is a game I've been playing. And I'll tell you one of the biggest things I don't like about New World. It's that you go out and you think, okay, I'm going to, let's say, level up my weapon crafting skill. So you go to the workbench and you create some low-level weapons, because that's what you're able to produce. And you can't sell them, because in New World, you can't sell a stack of weapons. You're going to have to sell them one at a time. And so you can't really see market price trends and just, you know, put a stack of 900 of them up there for sale. And players are going to get better gear just from drops than they ever would get from you crafting it and selling it on the marketplace in many cases. So when you look at weapons for sale, you'll see all sorts of arbitrary prices. You might have a 700 gear score weapon that's on sale for 500 gold, and then you might have another one that looks basically identical, and it's marked for 50,000 gold. And is it really any different? No, probably not. It's just there's only a few that anyone's bothered to list, and they have just kind of made up a price. One person put a low price, one person put a high price, but there's not any consistency in terms of market value there. And a big part of it is because players get gear from drops that is not player crafted, and there's not really any incentive for selling stuff that you make. So it's just not fun. It's not fun to think, okay, I'm going to craft a whole bunch of weapons just so that I can destroy them out of my inventory because I'm trying to grind up to get to a higher gear score in terms of crafting level. It's not fun when you compare it to something like Albion Online, where you come in and maybe all I know how to make is tier 3 crossbows. So I make tier 3 crossbows, and then I can sell those because experienced players are going to want them because they're disposable gear. And new players are going to want them because maybe they still need that level of gear. And all of it is going to be used by somebody. So even if it's a low level thing that I've made, it's still something that's relevant in the economy. And I understand what goes into making it. Now, I know there's some RNG to a certain point because you get certain artifacts and stuff from drops in Albion Online. But for the greater part, stuff you make is a very clear-cut, simple recipe that you need a certain amount of wood and a certain amount of leather, and it has to be a certain kind, and then you can make something with it. You know what you need to make that thing, and then if you want to go get the materials, you just go get them and you refine them, and then you make a finished product with that. And that's pretty amazing. It's really fun, and it's kind of like, you know, it's like real life in that way. Like whether you want to be super involved in the economy or if you take a more passive approach, it doesn't really matter so much because you're part of something that's a living, breathing world. It's just like if I went out to, you know, go for a walk around my neighborhood. Does it really matter whether I walk 1 mile or I walk 5 miles? Not really, because I'm just enjoying the experience. Doesn't matter if I talk to my neighbors or I don't talk to my neighbors. Well, no, it really doesn't. That's my choice, but the world feels real because I know my neighbors are there. I know I could talk to them if I wanted to. I know that all of these things are interactable in a realistic way. So even if you choose not to interact with them, your existence in the game's ecosystem makes you part of that world in some way. Everything you do contributes in some way passively to the economy. And it just doesn't feel that way in other games. And that's where I always come back to Albion Online, because I like that sense of a realistic, simulated economy in the game versus something that seems like it's more geared toward that unhealthy grinding, where it's just a meaningless, arbitrary mechanic saying that you as a player need to put a whole bunch of time into the game so that you can get to another arbitrary level that was set by the devs. It doesn't feel like a simulation. It feels like almost more like a punishment. You have to go do the same thing over and over again for, you know, a very long time. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about with Albion Online is just how lightweight the client is and how that actually adds to a level of immersion. So with Albion Online, it doesn't really matter what computer you play it on. It doesn't really matter. You could play it on a phone. You can play it on the PC, you could play it on a laptop, on a high-end gaming computer, whatever you have, it doesn't really matter, because the system requirements for the game are really pretty low. Obviously, there is some level of system requirements, so if you have an ancient computer, then possibly that doesn't apply to everybody. But by and large, you don't have to have a brand new gaming computer to play this game very well at max settings. And it doesn't take long to load into it, and you can get into it from pretty much anywhere. If you have a reasonably new phone, then you can log in and play the game from your mobile device. And what's nice about that is it creates the sense that the world is something you're always loosely connected to. It doesn't feel like you have to go out of your way to go sit down at the computer and get it loaded up and make a whole event out of it. It's very easy to fit it into the spaces in between in your life. So if you're doing other things, it doesn't feel like you have to necessarily drop everything else just for this one particular game. And I do like that. And there's little things, just like being able to easily have your two screens going, and if you want to, you just move the mouse from one screen to the other screen. I could be doing something else on my other monitor very easily, and the game does not interfere with other stuff I'm doing, even if it's just watching a TV show on the other screen or doing something else, you know, that involves kind of toggling from one screen to the other. It's very easy to do that. And even though it doesn't seem like a huge deal, it winds up being a benefit to immersion, because there's fewer barriers to jumping in and out casually. Like, you know, I'll tell you, like yesterday, I get off work, I feel tired, I just don't even feel like playing any games at all. And I'll tell you, the game I played was Albion Online. Why? Because it's so easy to jump in and out of it. I was able to just sit there and watch the news a little bit and do my daily harvesting of my crops and gather a little bit, and then play the game a little bit on my phone before I went to sleep. And that was it. You know, I didn't have to worry about, you know, any kind of labor to get into the game and then make it, you know, a full long hour-long session or anything like that. I could just jump in and jump out as I felt like it, and that's really nice. And I also think it's kind of true in general. The things that wind up being the healthiest relationships in our life are the ones that don't really impose themselves disproportionately on us. They're there when we want them, they're there when we need them, but they're not there at the expense of other parts of our life. They're not expecting that we have to give more than what we have to give, or that we can't just kind of live our lives and then fit them around everything else. And the truth is, when you have something that really respects your time, you're more likely to give it your time cheerfully and in a way that you enjoy. And that goes back to just the reality of trying to be, shall I say, it's trying to be delivering a good experience versus promising a good experience. You know, like there's so many games where you have a great splash screens and you have these amazing graphics and you have this promise that it's going to immerse you in this wonderful world of adventure, and then the reality is it winds up just feeling like a chore to get into it. And then there's maybe a game that's a little simpler, maybe something like Albion Online, and yet even though it doesn't promise a wild amount of immersion, it delivers on that better, because what it does deliver on winds up being respectful of your time, and it's not that obnoxious grind. It's just an experience that's there for you if and when you want it. And so what defines the difference between progression and grind? Well, it's like if I go out for a walk around my neighborhood, which I often do, I never look at that and think, well, I didn't have a good enough experience, because I don't really have any expectation for the experience. But I'm also not obligated to do it. There isn't anything that says that I have to walk more or walk further. I just do it because I enjoy the experience. That's it. And if you can just enjoy the experience without feeling a sense of obligation, then that's progression. But if you're doing it because there's an arbitrary goal set for you by somebody else that wants you to invest more and more of your time into it, well, then that's a grind. And you don't ever want to be tied into something that's so much of a burden on your time that you always feel like you can't do other things that are on your list that you want to do because you have this ridiculous amount of content that you need to get through first. And the mountain of things that you need to do first just always stays there. There's more being added on all the time, so you can't get around to other things. And that's something I think it's pretty important, because work-life balance matters, and balance in the games we play or the relationships we have, it all matters. And being able to give consent to the way you spend your time so that you can diversify your experience in life and do other things in conjunction, that's very valuable. So how do you know? Well, I think it goes back to good trees don't bear bad fruit. And if you're having a good time, you'll know you're having a good time, because you're never going to have to remind yourself that it's a commitment or it's a promise or it's an obligation. You just do it because you want to. And if it winds up being something where you feel like it's a chore, then that's the telltale sign where you know, just take a break from it. And I definitely believe a good thing to do is you take a break from things, step away entirely, and then see, do you really miss it? And if you do, then at some point you get that itch, you think, man, I really want to go back to that. And sometimes you do. And then other times you just think, man, I'm glad I don't have to worry about that anymore. And if you feel like you're just glad to not have that extra weight and burden, then let those things go, because we really don't need to add more things to burden us spiritually or in terms of our time or in terms of our peace of mind. Because there's a lot of things to do in life without adding things to our plate that wind up feeling like they're constraining and burdensome. Wherever you find yourself, good luck on your adventure. Until next time, thank you for watching.